This week, we're heading to Philadelphia on American Airlines, but we'll hardly touch on that. Instead, I want to focus on money. More specifically, Delta Airlines and two interesting aspects of their business. First, we'll look at an interesting way that they make money, and then we'll examine, investigate, get eyes on one strange way that they save money. Oh, and we'll also touch on the history of airport lounges. Why in the world are there these semi-exclusive buffets in almost every airport? We're starting this one in Boston at an airport lounge. Unfortunately, it's the American Airlines lounge. We're not flying Delta here, but I do want to focus on them. And let's start with a simple question. Are they a profitable airline? This may sound a bit silly. They're the world's largest airline by revenue and the most profitable, if we don't include the privately held Emirates. But are they actually making money flying people around? Well, rather interestingly, the answer is no, not really. Delta does a pretty good job at breaking out all of their revenue sources in their financial statements, and from all of that, we can figure out that the core airline part of the business, flying people around, runs at roughly a 2.5% loss. But once we add in their loyalty program and a few other miscellaneous revenue sources, but mostly the loyalty program, the overall company runs at a 10.5% profit margin. Delta is not alone here. In fact, we can see from some great analysis by Visual Approach Analytics that the 5 biggest US airlines all have similar, if not more dramatic economics. Now, I think we all know that loyalty programs for airlines are massive money spinners. One of those classic old sayings is that airlines are credit card companies that fly planes as a side hustle. But the scale and profitability of these programs and the way in which Delta specifically has transformed their business over the past decade to really revolve around their loyalty program is truly remarkable, or ridiculous. I'll let you be the judge of that. I want to focus on Delta's shift towards premium travel and loyalty revenue, and how these have gone hand in hand to make them one of the most resilient airlines in the world. At least resilient in terms of airlines. This is not an easy business to be in. So let's start with the premium travel part of this picture. Over the last decade, Delta has successfully pivoted towards the premium market. If we look at some numbers, back in 2011, 2012, before this pivot, roughly 20% of the seats on their planes were premium. Think business or domestic first class. But of these seats, only 14% of them were generating any revenue. They just weren't able to sell them. Now look, they weren't empty, they were being given away as upgrades to high status loyalty members. But today, this has flipped. Roughly 30% of the seats on their planes are now premium, and they're selling 88% of them for cash, real money. So how have they done this? Well, there's a few factors, with the first big one being they simply dropped the price, at least on short-haul domestic flights. Back in 2010, a first class seat was roughly 13 times the price of an economy seat. Today, it's more like 3 to 5 times the price. But they've also better segmented their cabins. There's now first class, premium economy, comfort plus, standard economy, basic economy. Instead of having this huge jump up to first or business class, they now have a bunch of more affordable little hops that entice passengers to buy a more premium option. Of course, we can't forget the actual experience. They have put a lot of money into upgrading their premium offerings, both in the sky with the seats and on the ground in the lounges. This has not only helped them generate more higher margin revenue, it's also helped them to become the world's most valuable airline brand for the last 7 years running, at least according to Brand Finance, a business valuation and strategy consulting firm based in the UK. But at the same time as this premium push was occurring, they've also turned their loyalty program, SkyMiles, into a cash machine. SkyMiles has been around since 1981, but it really started to print money when Delta launched their first SkyMiles credit card with American Express back in 1996. It was one of the earliest airline credit card programs, and it initially started as a nice little partnership that led to some side income, but it's slowly over the last 3 decades become a major driving force behind Delta's profitability. The amount Amex is paying out to Delta over the years has grown from under $2 billion in 2010 to over $7 billion in 2024, and they have a long-term target of growing this to over $10 billion in the near future. This is seen as highly profitable and durable revenue that now generates a disproportionate share of Delta's profits relative to their airline business. I mean, they're an airline, it's a bit crazy, but how does this all work in practice? Let's quickly run through it, and I was a bit surprised with one specific element of all of this. Let's say you sign up for a Delta SkyMiles Gold American Express credit card. Congratulations. And then you spend, let's say, $60 on an annual Wine Tracker Plus subscription. Not only do you now get alerts on great wine deals, you also receive 60 Delta Sky miles for that purchase. Those miles aren't just appearing out of nowhere. Amex is purchasing them from Delta, but how? Well, the merchant, me in this case, receives something like $58.50 after the interchange fees. Basically, Amex takes a cut of $1.50 from that sale. Out of that $1.50, Amex has to spend, and these are not public figures, but it's roughly estimated, around 2 cents per mile. So out of this transaction, Delta is getting $1.20 and Amex is getting 30 cents. This seems heavily skewed towards Delta, doesn't it? And it is, to some degree, but we'll get back to Amex in a second. Without getting too deep into the balance sheet and accounting here, I was always under the impression that airlines basically take the money for the miles and book it as an IOU. They have to keep it as a liability towards future travel. They're not booking the money made from selling miles as revenue straight away. Those miles will be used for seats on planes at some future date, and when that date comes, they then get to recognize that money as revenue. I was always under the impression that they were essentially arbitraging the value that they sell them at versus the value at which they get redeemed. For instance, if they're selling miles to Amex for 2 cents, they want you to redeem them at a value of less than 2 cents, and this is almost always the case. They control which seats get released, when, and how much they charge for them, so they'll always make a decent cut. It's basically a casino and they're the house. But of course, it isn't quite that simple. And this is the bit that really surprised me. They're actually able to instantly recognize a large chunk of the sales of miles as marketing revenue. This is truly a beautiful business. This means that from the roughly $6.9 billion in cash that Delta received from Amex in 2023, they were able to instantly book just under $3 billion of it as their marketing cut. Amex is using their branding on the cards, so Delta gets paid. This percentage seems insanely high to me, but it seems to be roughly the industry standard, and it's almost entirely profit. Now let's get back to Amex. They're handing over most of the money they make on the interchange fees. So why are they doing this deal? Well, firstly, they don't mind because they're able to make a healthy profit off the annual card fees and off the interest payments from revolving credit card debts.
We have 35 credit cards.
Delta cards represent 21% of Amex's worldwide card member loans. They generate around $15.5 billion a year in net interest income, so once you take into account credit losses, they're likely generating around $2.5 to $3 billion a year in interest income from Delta cardholders. Amex also doesn't mind giving Delta such a big cut because it helps them win new affluent customers. And this is why I emphasized earlier that the premium market push goes hand in hand with the increased loyalty revenues. If we zoom out here, the cycle is fairly simple. Delta goes more premium and they improve their overall brand. This leads to them competing less on price and having a wealthier customer base. The perfect fit for the already premium Amex. Co-branded credit cards are perfect here. Affluent people want all of the perks on their premium travel with Delta, and so they get and spend with these credit cards. This makes Delta more highly profitable revenue that isn't tied to flying, which in turn allows them to spend more to maintain and improve their further premium position in the market, and the cycle goes on until Delta is the only airline left and the sun has engulfed the entire solar system. No, not quite. They're of course competitors, but Delta is seemingly leading the pack here in terms of how much money they're able to squeeze out of the credit card market. So that's one way that they make a lot of money. But let's now head to Philly, where we'll discover a unique way that they save a lot of money. New York is out there somewhere. We're making a quick pit stop in New York here at LaGuardia Airport, and I've stopped in at the American Airlines Admirals Club. Now, this lounge, well, not this specific one because they've recently rebuilt LaGuardia, but the original LaGuardia Admirals Club was the first ever lounge built in the world, all the way back in 1939. Why here? Well, it comes down to the airport and the man it's named after, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. Back in the early 30s, New York's main airport was Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn. It was located a long way from Manhattan, so airlines shifted their New York services to Newark in New Jersey. Fiorello did not like this at all. In 1934, when he was flying home from Chicago on TWA, his plane landed at Newark. like almost every other New York flight back then. But he refused to get off. His ticket said New York, so he demanded to be flown to New York. After some back and forth, the crew obliged, flying just him to Bennett Field. It was a PR stunt, but it lit the fuse for a new airport closer to the city. By 1939, that new airport opened in Queens. It was modern, glamorous, and the mayor loved it. Now, there's this often repeated story out there that LaGuardia himself had a large office at this new airport, and that this caused a lot of criticism from the press. This criticism eventuated with him abandoning the office and American Airlines taking it over, building the first airport lounge. This is not quite true. He did have an office at the airport, he loved greeting visiting dignitaries, and yes, the press criticized it. But the lounge space that American Airlines leased was planned from the start. American Airlines were major supporters of this new airport, and this allowed them to lease a space and open an invitation-only members club for VIPs, celebrities, and politicians. You could not buy or earn access. You had to be invited by the airline. Inside, there were plush chairs, private service, and an open bar. Rather interestingly, for those with a keen eye, in the modern day and much less exclusive Admirals Club here in LaGuardia, they have these bottles of alcohol up on display. There's a bit of a backstory. These bottles are from the private collection of American Airlines chairman, back in the day, C.R. Smith. When American opened their second lounge in Washington's National Airport, they couldn't legally serve or sell alcohol under Virginia law. This was just after the Prohibition era, and there were still tight rules dictating where alcohol could be purchased. So American Airlines implemented a workaround. Smith stored his alcohol in the club for VIPs to enjoy, and some of these bottles have stuck around and are kept as a memento of those earlier days. Other airlines followed suit with the whole members club move. TWA opened their Ambassadors Club in 1952, Pan Am introduced the Clippers Club in 1953, and Delta introduced its Crown Room in the late 1950s. Exclusivity eventually loosened. Paid memberships became a thing in the late 60s, early 70s, frequent flyer access followed in the 80s, and credit card entry took off in the 90s. And today, just about anyone with a bit of planning, be it a day pass, credit card, or status, can walk in. But it all traces back to LaGuardia in 1939.
I find Delta Airlines fascinating. They do things a little bit differently. Delta, interestingly, buys a lot of used planes. They're not as interested in getting the most fuel-efficient jets. This lets them not only have a cheaper acquisition cost on the planes, and they've sort of figured that that makes up for the increased fuel costs over time. They also do something very unique that no other airline has done. Are you ready? They own this. This is Monroe Energy. This is the Trainer Refinery. I'm in Trainer, Pennsylvania. We're about half an hour south of Philadelphia right now. It is freezing. It's like -2 degrees Celsius. Yeah, let's go for a bit of a wander around this thing and learn a bit more about it. What's the deal with this refinery? I've got some geese here. Gobble, gobble, gobble. Delta purchased the refinery in 2012 for $150 million and then spent another $100 million kind of doing it up. Without getting too much into the world of refining, essentially it works like this. Crude oil goes in and then it gets refined into a bunch of different products. You got plastics, you got petrol, obviously, diesel, and jet fuel. And so through different processes, different equipment, you can vary your percentages of those different products. Obviously, Delta pretty much just wants to make jet fuel out of this plant, but that's not quite possible. I don't know, I'm pulling numbers a bit out of my ass now, but I believe that a general refinery refines about 5 to 10% into jet fuel, whereas this plant is set up to do 40%. The rest is plastics, petrol, diesel, stuff like that. I'm not quite a visitor, am I? Haven't really been invited. And look, it's been well over 10 years now. Did this whole plan work?
Well, this whole story is a bit more complicated than just a simple one-line answer, and it involves refining spreads and a rather controversial guy called Jon Ruggles. So let's go back to 2012 to understand the grander plan at play here. Delta was facing a crisis. They were the world's largest jet fuel consumer, and their annual fuel bill had ballooned from $8.9 billion in 2010 to $12.2 billion in 2012. all while their consumption had actually dropped by about 2.5%. Jet fuel was the company's largest single expense. A large chunk of this increase can be put down to the price of crude oil. It had increased 20% over this time frame, but an even bigger element was at play, a factor identified by Delta's CEO at the time, Richard Anderson, as the fastest growing portion of all of Delta's expenses. It was the jet fuel crack spreads. What in the world is this? The jet fuel crack is basically what refineries charge to transform crude oil into jet fuel. It's their refining margin. And at this point in time, specifically in the New York jet fuel market, it was exploding. But why? The local refineries around Philadelphia that traditionally supplied the New York market were dropping like flies, and by 2011, the East Coast had lost roughly half of its refining capacity as aging facilities were shut down. Delta still needed 200 million gallons of jet fuel every year just for their New York operations at JFK and LaGuardia, and with a large chunk of the local refinery capacity gone, that fuel had to come from somewhere else. Either the Gulf Coast refineries, 1,000 miles away, or imports from, say, Europe. And this was driving the price up for jet fuel independently of the actual crude oil price. And this is where we get to Jon Ruggles and their hedging of the markets. Ruggles was recruited by Anderson in early 2011 to be Delta's new VP of Fuel. He had experience as both an energy commodities trader and directly in the oil industry, working technical roles at ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips. Anderson brought him in to restructure Delta's fuel operations to act more like a commodity trading house instead of just being a price taker. In more simple, non-finance terms here, prior to 2011, Delta was a purchaser of fuel. They did have a traditional fuel hedging program, but like a lot of airlines at the time, they weren't very good at it. They lost $1.4 billion hedging in 2009, and whilst things did improve in 2010, they still lost $89 million. They needed change. So, under this new regime, Ruggles brought in a team of experienced energy traders from Wall Street, and they quickly got to work fixing up the fuel hedging. And it worked. Rather miraculously, they generated $420 million in derivatives trading profits for Delta in 2011 alone, a massive turnaround from the $1.4 billion loss just 2 years prior. There is a bit of a crazy story about Ruggles from 2011. The Groundhog Day blizzard had forced Delta to cancel thousands of flights, wiping out the cash earmarked for employee bonuses that year. In an emergency meeting, executives were scrambling to find $100 million. They discussed spending cuts, restructuring debt, anything to avoid canceling bonuses. Ed Bastian, then president of the company, he's now the CEO, turned to Ruggles and asked him if there was anything that he could do in the fuel department. Ruggles suggested that they could trade a bit and make some money. Bastian was open to this idea and said that if they could generate $40 to $50 million, it would help matters greatly. Ruggles saw an opportunity in the heating oil market. He set up a complex options trading strategy, essentially betting that heating oil prices would stay within a certain range over the following months. Shortly after entering the position, Goldman Sachs called, bewildered. They were Delta's primary broker, and they demanded to know what the hell Ruggles was doing.
I'm sorry, are you for real?
Why in the world is an airline reserving the right to sell heating oil? After Ruggles proved that he did have management approval, they allowed the trades. And this gamble paid off massively. Instead of the requested $40 or $50 million, Ruggles delivered $100 million in profit through this single bet, enough to fully fund employee bonuses that year. It was an audacious move. Ruggles is an audacious guy, and he would eventually end up in some hot water with federal regulators. But we'll get back to that a bit later. It was also in 2011 that Ruggles and Anderson came up with the plan to purchase a refinery. But why buy a whole damn refinery? Well, Ruggles and his trading team were able to bet and hedge the price of crude oil, the raw stuff, but they couldn't effectively hedge the regional jet fuel crack spread. There was no financial instrument that allowed them to protect against New York jet fuel premiums. Every airline was getting squeezed the same way, but Delta, as the largest fuel consumer, was bleeding the most. And an excellent opportunity, the perfect physical hedge, existed just outside of Philadelphia.
Welcome to the borough of Trainer.
The Trainer refinery had just been shut down by ConocoPhillips in September of 2011. It was losing money, it was old, and ConocoPhillips wanted out. But Ruggles and Anderson saw something different. They saw a 185,000 barrel per day facility with direct pipeline access to JFK and LaGuardia airports. It was perfectly positioned to serve Delta's Northeast operations. And it was also relatively cheap. For $250 million all in, the price of a single wide-body jet, they could not only hedge the refining crack, they could also own it. On paper, it was the ideal move. If the jet fuel crack increased significantly in the New York market, Delta didn't mind. Their refinery would print money. If the jet fuel crack decreased in the New York market, the refinery might not make much money at all. But who cares? The airline side of things would benefit with cheaper fuel prices. They also set up deals with BP and Phillips 66 to swap all the other products they were producing for jet fuel at other airports across the country. All in all, by purchasing the refinery, Delta would be able to self-supply around 80% of their jet fuel needs in the US. So how is it done in reality? Well, up until 2019, it was a mixed bag really. For those first 8 years, if we add it all up, they made $326 million. But the pandemic was when things got a little crazy in the refining world. 2020 led to the biggest loss in the history of the refinery, but 2022 alone probably justified the whole purchase, with them netting over $770 million in profit for that year alone. So was it the right move? For the unique crisis Delta was facing in 2012, absolutely. It was a bold solution to a crippling problem, but it wasn't a silver bullet, and its mixed results are exactly why you don't see other airlines rushing out to buy oil refineries today.
There's not a single Tesla in that car park.
Looking ahead, this strategy might become more common though. As electric cars reduce demand for gasoline, what happens to refineries? Jet fuel is just a small fraction of their output. If refineries start closing because no one's buying gasoline, airlines could be left scrambling. Owning their own fuel supply might shift from a clever hedge to a necessary lifeline. I do want to quickly mention Jon Ruggles again. He worked at Delta for under 2 years and left just after the refinery's opening. That's not that suspicious in and of itself, but he was later charged by the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, for fraudulent trading activities that he conducted during his time at Delta in 2012. The core allegation here was that Ruggles was using inside information of Delta's fuel trades and front-running them personally using an account in his wife's name. He ultimately settled this case with the CFTC, paying a fine of $1.75 million and paying back $3.5 million in ill-gotten gains. But as part of the deal, he admitted no wrongdoing. The case is particularly interesting because it's one of the first cases brought by the CFTC for insider trading in the commodities market. Prior to 2010, it was not illegal to trade on insider information. The commodity market was seen as too liquid and too large. For instance, no single person could truly have inside information on the entire oil market. It's a bit different from the stock market. For instance, Ruggles would know if, say, he completely messed up the fuel hedges for a specific quarter, and if Delta was about to post a big loss. If he then went and shorted the stock, this would be clearly using insider information to your advantage. But it was seen, at least prior to 2010, that nobody could have this sort of information about a whole commodity market. That being said, the scale of Delta's fuel buying did move the market. Not a lot, but they did have a small impact, and while it was alleged that Ruggles figured out how to profit off this, he ultimately transformed Delta's fuel strategy, delivering $420 million in profits, and architected a refinery acquisition that still operates today. But he was also secretly trading on insider information, front-running the very trades he was executing for the airline. I guess sometimes the best ideas come from the most controversial people.
So yes, a success but not a roaring success. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out too over the next 20 years, 10, 20 years, if they'll keep on operating the refinery. Who knows how it'll all go? Who knows if I'm going to make it home or back to my hotel? I'm going to walk it. It's like 4 kilometers, but I need to walk. It's a unique area to walk through. I hope I don't get shot. Anyway, there it is. Trainer refinery. Goodbye for now, and well, probably ever. I don't think I'll ever come back here, to be honest. Either way, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.
Simon? Is that Simon?
What's Simon?
Look at this chair. Man, what is this chair doing here? We've got a parallel cock chair. And then, wait, actually, I haven't moved them. I walked into the room just there.